Welcome, guys. Thank you for tuning in to yet another installment with some brilliant minds in the field of integrative medicine all across the world. Today, I have the honor of introducing a good friend of mine, probably South Africa's best naturopathic doctor, Dr. Rory Jean-Jacques. Welcome.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
It's absolutely awesome to see you.
Yeah, it's great to share my history in terms of health and the results I get with patients. So, looking forward to downloading as much value for people that are watching.
I love what you just said about your history.
Yes.
You and I had a conversation not too long ago about how traditional healers here in South Africa, otherwise known as Sangoma, go through their own plights of disease, dysfunction, whatever label you want to give that, in order to come up into the epiphany of how to go about treating the energy of disease, not necessarily the logical objectivity of it, but the energy to it. Would you mind sharing with the audience a little bit about your journey of how you found motivation into that? Because let's be honest here, going into this form of industry, it's not a small feat.
No, and the thing is, it's not something many practitioners intentionally go into. Health issues happen to them, and it's part of the process of them learning how to heal it for themselves that they start studying kinesiology, herbal medicine, live blood analysis, homeopathy, to address, or integrative medicine, to address their own health issues that they're not finding the answers for from traditional allopathic avenues. And I think the Sangomas and healers in South Africa have, from an African tradition, what they call the calling. So there's an illness that befalls them, and they have major health issues, whether it's inflammatory issues or something, and then they'll go to a traditional healer, and the healer will say, you have the calling. Your ancestors are calling you to be a healer. And then they go through the training and the initiation in it, their health issues start to improve. So it's an interesting sort of...
It's an intimate way of discovery.
Yes, because the thing is, you experience it firsthand.
Right.
Firsthand health issues and no results in the traditional routes. And that's what happened with me. I got extremely sick when I was in school. Doctors didn't know what was wrong with me. I played top rugby. I dropped from like 90 kilos to like 70 kilos in weight, couldn't digest my food, was absolutely exhausted all the time.
Sure.
And I went into a dispensary in Sandton City, and there was someone looking in the eyes, and I didn't know what they were doing. I just saw these bottles of liquid herbal tinctures, and he was mixing, and I was like, this is interesting. Like, I don't know what I need to do, but I need to be here. And he looked in my eyes and he said, you've got candida and you've got parasites, and you must do blood tests for Borrelia, and you must do this, and you've got adrenal fatigue, and your nervous system is exhausted, and all the, and I was like, this is bizarre. But he started treating me, and I started getting better.
Wow.
And that was the biggest shift for me, because after going for colonoscopies, gastroscopies, blood tests, back and forth, up and down, feeling like you're dying, and all you ever wanting is that you just wish, you're like, I'll do anything that it takes just to feel better.
Yeah.
All the money in the world doesn't mean anything. I just want to feel well. I want to be able to do the sports that I was able to, the water polo, the rugby, the running, and that kind of stuff. Not able to do that coming from being a top sportsman.
Sure.
So born from that was a compassion and an empathy going through that suffering. And then he then ended up becoming my mentor. Because I said to him, look, mix these.
Who was this?
His name was called Vincent Tones. Tones. He's probably one of the most prolific formulators of health products in the country.
Wow.
Hundreds. Unfortunately, he just passed away recently.
Sorry.
But one of the most incredible minds and herbalists, contributed numerous effects on the industry in South Africa. And his product, most of his products and his ranges are still around today. And he started mentoring me. He was actually the principal of the SA College of Herbalism at the time, and then the chairman of the Naturopathic Association back then. And then he started mentoring me, and I did my studies. And while I was doing my matric, I was doing his course and his tutelage at the same time. So I qualified with both of them at the same time.
Phenomenal.
But I was 18, and they were all like, how can you know anything about this? And I was like, I know. You understand, it comes from
enough of a motivation to know.
100%.
Yeah.
And then that started the journey, and then studied naturopathic medicine, Western, Ayurvedic, Chinese herbal medicine,
Wow.
all the herbal disciplines, what you call planetary herbalism.
Yes.
So my speciality is medical herbalism and the application of that.
Wow.
And bridging the age-old myths and traditions of herbal medicine with all the clinical studies that they're bringing. And that also comes down to potency, quality, standardization of herbal extracts,
Yes.
What they're using in the clinical studies so that you can get those consistent outcomes that you're looking for. And I think that's a lot of the problem that modern science or allopathics have, is that there's no standardization.
Right.
They're doing a testing on echinacea, but they're not using the right species. They're not using the right standardization for alkaloids.
Interesting.
So you maybe need to use 3 different species together. So I like to bridge the gap between the two, between ancient and modern science. And that's theoretically what integrative medicine and complementary medicine is doing.
Yeah.
These are ancient healing systems that, Ayurveda, which is the study of life, that is the grandmother. You understand?
Yeah.
Chinese medicine then originated from that. And they've been doing those studies in clinical studies 5,000 years
Wow.
Ahead of time. And in China, when you go into hospitals, there are hospitals completely dedicated to,
Chinese
they do
medicine.
full blood tests, they do everything, and it's run like an allopathic hospital, but all your treatments are with acupuncture and moxibustion and Chinese herbal application, or they've got integrative, so you can do both.
Phenomenal.
They are proper MDs, medical doctors, but they've trained in the Chinese as well, and they've embraced and protected their heritage. And that's why they had such incredible recoveries and outcomes after, COVID and things like that, because they were applying, ancient Chinese herbal formulas to get lymphocytes back up and that vitality, and drop the neuroinflammation that was coming as a result of things.
Phenomenal.
Yeah.
Yeah, it actually brings you back to that understanding about built levels of logic.
Yes.
Where a person is ignorantly bliss, thinking that they know a lot more than what they do, which is unfortunately the outcome of egotistical growth in any industry, especially the initial birth of an industry. If you think about like modern day Western medicine, it's not very old.
No, it's 150 years old.
It's the baby among the bunch. All right.
Very true.
A lot of arrogance has come out of its birthing.
Very true.
So it's good to see that someone like yourself is bringing science into the metaphysical concepts, which people perceive as metaphysical, because they don't have a complete understanding of the systems and how they work. But bridging that gap by bringing the understanding of mechanisms, methods, processes that we are accustomed to, and positioning all these metaphysical, quote-unquote, metaphysical understandings into a continuum of logical expansion. And I believe that's, it ties into what we call the age of Aquarius, right? Where you merge the science and the spirit together to create full continual understanding of what's going on in our condition, in our experiences.
100%. You are not just a bag of meat. You're consciousness in a vehicle. But the thing is, what a lot of people don't realize is the effect that your emotions have on your biology, and also how your biology also affects your emotions. And we study that in Chinese medicine. A sluggish, what they would call stagnant liver qi, or liver energy, where it's stagnating, it's not moving and being dispersed, will cause anger, irritability, issues with sleep, issues with hormonal regulation, because that liver flow of bile and that liver metabolism is not where it needs to be, manifests in those emotions. Absolutely. At the same time, experiencing those emotions of being angry at someone or resenting someone will cause that stagnation, and that becomes that vicious cycle. So we look at the person, what is your personality like? What is your primary demeanor? How are you? And that's not normally a natural state.
No.
That's driven by what is happening physically, what stagnations are happening in which organ systems, which systems are depleted, which minerals are depleted in those systems or systemically, things like lithium and magnesium and all these things that are needed for optimal neurotransmitter balance.
Of course.
So you are mind, body, spirit, and we've all the greatest sages of all the time speak about that. And you run on electromagnetic energy. That is that's not fiction. It's not woo-woo. It's been verified through science.
Yes.
And you are the body electric. So when you get your electrolytes and your minerals correct, all of a sudden the thinking becomes clearer, your mood improves, your ability to conceive and perceive and relate to your environment, and the adaptability to your environment just expands to a whole other level.
Yeah.
And that's what we learn in kinesiology, which is what they call the highest resonance of all the healing modalities,
Yes.
because you're using your ability to tap into the body's subconscious, using the muscles as a keyboard and bypassing the ego and the conscious mind and tapping straight in and basically drilling down which levels are we working, mental, emotional, physical.
Wow.
Was this a trauma that happened, when you were 3 years old? What is the correction that would be the optimal correction? Is it pressure point? Is it meridians? Is it this? Is it, reworking your neurology? And that's the power of it. And that's when you realize, man, there's so many factors and so many levels that play into things. And this is also where homeopaths come in and treat. They can look at you and say, this is the miasm that you have.
Yeah.
Many, many generations before, one of your family members had syphilis, and that altered how your DNA
expression.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is why you have these current issues now. Then they can treat you homeopathically for that miasm, and you can get improvements in it.
Yeah.
So you can start to improve your lineage and how your epigenetic expression improves going forward. Yeah. And the levels are unbelievable, so.
I just find it so interesting and actually baffling at the same time how people consider it to be so fantastical that things that have happened to your ancestors generations ago could influence your genetics today.
Yeah.
Right? Where in actual fact, if it's because of the agricultural age and everything else that's come about before that and thereafter, that has influenced our expression of methylation amongst other aspects of health, right? Altering that expression of methylation, especially in the day and age which we live in right now, where we're exposed to an insurmountable amount of free radicals. So I find it fascinating how there's a partial resistance to that understanding as to historical generational trauma having influence over genetic expression. And not just trauma in terms of a disease like syphilis or what have you, but actual trauma in terms of psychological trauma. It's been cited in so many scientific journals as of late, in the last 10 years especially, where they document the neural development of a fetus during the times of gestation. And whatever the mother goes through can have a direct influence on that particular child because of the influx of glucocorticoids or cortisol that may flood the system, altering the expression of that child's genetics.
Absolutely.
And I think this knowledge is really needed, and there's a greater understanding that's required in medical practice as a whole. And I, for one, am really excited for the future of the integration of different forms of practitioners into a continuum, which is something I believe is birthing right now.
It's happening, and you'll see, MDs that have studied in a very myopic paradigm. The ones that are using integrative medicine are getting the best clinical outcomes with their patients. And those that are stuck in the indoctrination of the propaganda of there's no research and there's no literature and there's no science behind it. And where's the double-blind placebo-controlled studies? They're there. How much time have you got? I can fill your room to the top. They're all there. They don't have the time or the inclination. They have a lifestyle to maintain. Maybe they just, they don't want to venture into that because of how it will affect their licenses. But the doctors that are doing it, that are using the best of both worlds and mitigating the negative downside side effects of what allopathic, chemicals do in the system, and also mitigating the negative side effects of herbals, which are there as well. They're biological response modifiers. They've got a whole range of things you need to learn how to apply them. So I think because there is a new paradigm and practitioners are looking and saying DNA testing has become so prolific. Yeah. You can analyze your whole history of your DNA and then do it even deeper. Which SNPs are you missing? Why do you have a propensity to low cholesterol or high cholesterol? Or why do you have these symptoms? Oh, you don't methylate properly.
Correct.
So where did that origin come from? Doesn't matter. This is where you are now.
Oh, right now.
Correct. You can go and try and treat it through kinesiology or homeopathic treatment, but you're obviously dealing with a range of health issues now, and then that can be exacerbated on top of things with microbial infections, chronic infections, stealth infections.
Absolutely.
So
is it safe to say from what you just mentioned right now that a person's susceptibility to any form of microorganism, this is a microbial infection, has a large part to play within their generational inheritance within their genes? And it doesn't necessarily say about infections that may have happened in generations past, but it can also be emotional, right? So, for example, if somebody were to have family would have come from a war-stricken part of the world for generations, this is going to have an influence,
of course,
on their genes.
Yeah,
creating a high susceptibility to infections. Is it safe to make that assumption?
Absolutely. I think that plays a massive factor. They've in very short periods of time, they've analyzed with glowworms from generation to generation. The glowworms only sort of live for a few weeks to a month, and they expose them to various stresses, sounds, smells, toxicities. And you can watch how they'll expose the first generation to that particular, and by the fifth generation, they expose them to that. They have the same response, although they've never reached it. But you can see that evolution of response to it, or the effect that it has. And I mean, we've seen that now with glyphosate.
Yeah.
And with genetically modified foods, how they'll feed rats on generation to generation. And by the fifth generation of feeding the glyphosate fish food, they're practically sterile.
Yeah.
And their risk of cancers is almost 80%. Because of the way it chelates metals and the way it damages DNA on a cellular level and things like that.
Yeah.
So I think war trauma, emotional trauma, psychological, physical trauma, infection trauma, radiation trauma, all of that kind of stuff will have an expression on your genetics and will be passed down the lineage.
Yeah.
Asperger's autistic spectrum, is that part of that expression? Is it also the host is the mother, giving birth to the child? What is her level of toxicity?
Correct.
What is her heavy metals and, endotoxin, plastic levels, BPA, all of those toxicity levels? What are her stealth infections that she doesn't know about? How does that translate to what is her stress levels while she's pregnant? What does that do to the fetus, and what does that do when the child is born? And I think there's so many etiologies and so many factors that play into it, but these are some of the primary ones that we're seeing and they're trying to link. And then when the children are born, the level of toxicity and immuno challenge that they respond the moment they get injected with,
don't even get me started on that
vaccines and the response that comes from that.
Even apart from the vaccines, even before they get to the point of being infected.
Yes.
Drugs.
Yes.
I'm saying infected because often more than not, it is as though they actually develop an infection from it. Mm-hmm. They literally express that of an infection, breaking out into hives, rashes, having fevers, and what have you. Right? I mean, if this is happening, obviously the body is rejecting what it shouldn't receive. And I understand there's always going to be a hormetic influence, and there are symptoms that are associated with that. But depending upon the person, it's always the length of time that dictates whether or not a poison can be beneficial or detrimental to a person.
Yeah, length of time and dose. The dose makes the poison.
Or the medicine.
And the accumulation of it as well, or the processing of it as well.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. But even apart from all of that, just the birthing process of modern day times. I mean, can you imagine? You've never opened your eyes, and you have, obviously they haven't in their life because they've just been born. You never heard anything apart from possibly vibrations in your mother's womb. You never smelled anything. And you get born into an operating room with blaring lights, beeping sounds, the smell of bleach or cleaning products, and that's what you're born into. Can you imagine the sympathetic drive that the nervous system has to take up that information, that process, that information, and what outcome that has for the person for the remainder of their life?
Yeah, it's traumatic, and if it's also a traumatic birth, and
on top of that, even compounded. But even if you had the birth been perfectly well in a modern day setting, just those elements alone, we've set up a society of sympathetically dominant human beings. This is why majority of society is now living in a stressful state. I mean, depression is the second leading cause of disability worldwide.
Yeah.
Why? And it's growing. It's not being contended with.
Yeah, it's the
worse.
pressure and the stress that people are under. Most people are subclinical Addisons, or, modern medicine will not acknowledge adrenal fatigue, but your adrenal's ability to produce all your grandmother hormones like DHEA and pregnenolone, and manage your blood pressure and manage your minerals, and manage EPO production and your blood production. There's only so much abuse and stress that you can put a system through before it starts not functioning optimally. Yeah. And there's a zone of dysfunction that exists in symptomology that we look at in naturopathic medicine and in Chinese medicine that gives us all of that language. Yes. It's all the symptomology. When it gets to this level, that's when your EGFR, your kidney filtration has started to drop. That's when the damage is you've progressed. That's when you start seeing issues with, creatinine, urea, or you start seeing the liver enzymes elevated, or you start seeing those issues because it's so far. But during that time, you've had all of the symptoms, the fatigue in the late afternoon and the inability to manage stress.
Like, it's normal now.
No, I'm tired in the afternoon because it's been a hard day. No, it's not. It's not. Yeah. Functioning at an optimal level of mental, emotional, physical is our natural state. Yeah. All of these stresses, and compounded on top of that excessive adrenal stress, your immune system becomes compromised, your detoxification becomes compromised. And then
in an environment with ever mutating viruses, pathogens,
all kinds. And I mean, it's probably
really setting ourselves up to fail, aren't we?
It's one of the number one things I treat is primarily deficiency syndromes, stagnation and toxicity syndromes. And then on top of those environments, it creates the right soil within your body for fungal, bacterial, protozoal, spirochetal, all these stealth infections that historically have been with us, but our vitality was such a level that it wouldn't cause the challenges.
Yep.
But we've got EMF assaults which affect toxicity. We've got heavy metal and geoengineering and whatever other aerosols. We've got toxic minerals in our water supplies, fluoride, chlorine. We've got bromide in our bread products. Yeah. Those are disrupting all our most dominant halogen, which is iodine. Yeah. We've got heavy metal toxicity in our food supply. And the number one heavy metal that I see using a LIGO scan and urine challenge testing is aluminium.
Yep.
Every single person off the charts.
Yeah, I agree.
Secondary to that, mercury, and then we get lead, and then all the other ones. And if you look at that symptomology, I mean, have you seen what mercury does to a neuron? And people...
And what aluminium does to the pineal gland.
Absolutely, right? Absolutely.
I mean, just that alone.
Yeah.
How important is melatonin in a developing brain?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I had a conversation with another psychologist about this, and how the structure of the microglia in the early years of life is an amoeboid structure, which means it's more reactive to stressful stimuli. Why? Because the nervous system is trying to update its program for adulthood, so it knows how to respond accordingly. But in a situation where your pineal gland is calcified because of aluminium, you don't have the antioxidant availability, because melatonin is the strongest antioxidant for the brain. And if you don't have that available to support all those morphological changes that are happening, you're going to have aberrant neuroplasticity come into effect.
Absolutely. Right. So you're not sleeping properly, you're not resting properly, you're not detoxifying properly.
Correct.
Your brain is not adapting to whatever stresses are happening in the system.
Correct.
And melatonin primarily is also your main hormone that drives all mitochondrial function. So if you haven't got that, you wonder why, your battery, your little engines, those little furnaces inside your cells are just not producing energy. And, that's a number one factor. So if you're getting that such assault of aluminium, whether it's injected or whether it's put in your salt or whether it's,
deodorant for most people.
Your deodorant that you've been using for so long, and this accumulative effect and the stress that it has on your detoxification enzymes, your methylation nutrients, your minerals like molybdenum and selenium, your glutathione acetyl transferase, and all of those factors, you get that extreme accumulation. and then you get the immunocompromise that comes with that, and that makes you more susceptible, and your microbes love heavy metals.
Oh, yes.
Your EBV and Coxsackie virus and all of those herpes-based love heavy metals, and they thrive on heavy metals. And then Candida uses it to build its extracellular matrix and its biofilms to protect itself.
And so does orchotoxin as well.
Yeah, orchotoxin, absolutely. Other forms of mold, and then your other stealth infections like Borrelia and Lyme's. They will also use that to create heavy metals, but also with calcium, magnesium, zinc.
Yeah.
You're taking a magnesium supplement and you're wondering why you're feeling worse. Why you're feeling so terrible.
Right.
You understand? Like, what is your infection burden, and which microbe do you have that's using that to create a biofilm?
Yeah.
And your mineral status is continually low. Why is your mineral status low? Because whatever you're taking in, it's chelating it and it's taking it, you're not able to utilize it, or it's producing byproduct toxins that are affecting its metabolism and its usage within the cell.
Absolutely.
Because these microbes produce exotoxins and endotoxins. And that hijack and disrupt how our internal enzyme systems work for detoxification.
Yeah.
And then you wonder, why is my detox? I just have an infection. No, you need to understand how those toxins have a knock-on effect and are giving you the symptomology, whether it's neurological, whether it's fatigue, or whether it's muscular, or whether it's any number of innumerable symptoms, depending on how it's manifesting in you as an individual, because you are completely unique in your DNA analysis, in how you think and how that affects the pH in your body, how it affects the oxygenation, what you eat, where you grew up, who you interact with, what you consume in terms of news, books, people, the environment. All of these variables vary from person to person, and you can't standardize it. That's why you treat the person, you do not treat the disease.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. That last point needs to really hit home. And really needs to hit home for a lot of practitioners out there as well. And I'm really not criticizing anyone. I'm just making an observation. Yeah. I recall 2 years ago, an autoimmune patient that came to us for support. She had seen a doctor about 2 months after having started treatment with us, and I think it was her B12 level was through the roof, and her magnesium levels were inadequate. Now, she'd been supplementing both. And the doctor immediately said to her, I'll continue to supplement with the magnesium, but cut out the B12. And this is a clear indication where a test doesn't give you the full indication of, just because a nutrient level is high, doesn't mean the body is actually utilizing. Quite on the contrary, it means that it's not being utilized effectively. And more often than not, especially when it comes to folate and B12, there are other endocrine disruptors. But coming down to the root cause of it, or the root core that compromises its transport, mitochondria again. Right? Most of the protein carriers that are produced to transport B12 and folate are produced through the mitochondria. So any element that's going to compromise mitochondrial health, whether it be a pathogen or whether it be an environmental toxin like a heavy metal or glyphosates or petrochemicals, these are factors that are not being taken into consideration when labs are analyzed to treat the person. To treat an individual, right? Yes, you've got to take into account the historical experience, whatever that may be, but you also have to take into account the current dynamic of what could be compromising the outcome of erratic lab reports. Right?
So I think traditional allopathic lab reports give you a very rudimentary perspective on things. True. If you can do organic acid testing and you can do biome analysis and you can do now you start to get a whole picture of why you're not utilizing it. What else cofactors are missing? What is interfering with that utilization on a cellular level? Maybe you need a different form of B12. You don't need the methylated. You need a hydroxyl or adenosine cobalamin or something along those lines. Or you need something that will work in synergy with it so that your mitochondria can start processing it, because this particular mineral is deficient or this particular toxin is interfering with that. Number of factors. And I think integrative practitioners are really, really good at looking at doing DNA analysis as the first step.
Yeah.
Doing a heavy metal analysis, whether it's through hair tissue mineral analysis, a urine challenge test, or through a LEGO scan, or a combination of that to get a perspective.
Yeah.
Doing live blood analysis to see what your terrain looks like, live and dark field analysis. So patients can see it visually. This is what I'm working with. They're not just numbers on a screen. And then doing organic acid testing and biome analysis. And then now you've got and if just doing that, you get a whole better, bigger picture of what's going on. And in the end, the proof is in the results.
Absolutely.
The practitioners that work with this get the clinical outcomes. The ones that don't they just will go from specialist to specialist till they come to someone like us, where we can actually look at it and unpack it in its entirety and really put them on a comprehensive protocol. And we always get the cases that are hopeless. They've been everywhere.
Correct.
To every specialist. And
I think one almost needs an engineering mindset more than a medical mindset to actually approach reforming health.
It's very true. It's very true.
It's the same as like if we were to take this example here, we have a professional video crew busy taking the recording from our conversation. But it's different viewpoints that they're utilizing, not just using one camera, using a camera from multiple lenses to get the full spectrum of what the energy is that we're trying to convey in this conversation.
Absolutely.
And the same needs to be done for medicine as well. Tell me, Rory, I want to get into what you just touched upon. You and Dr. Otko are absolute savants, specialists, prodigies in dark field live blood analysis.
Yes.
From my understanding, you have one of, if not the biggest educational faculty and fraternity that specialize in providing resource for education in dark field and live blood analysis to practitioners across the globe.
Correct. We are the biggest school or academy worldwide for live blood analysis. Dr. Boerter has been doing it for 20 years plus now. I think we probably have more than 5,000 students. There's nearly 300 to 400 students every 3 months.
Any practitioner that might be listening in?
Anywhere in the world, neogenesissystems.com. Neogenesissystems.com.
Okay.
And there'll be a full input on how the course works and how you need to do your case studies and microscopes and I mean it's utilized by doctors, specialists, pharmacists, homeopaths, naturopaths, all across the world. And there was a range of products that we developed around the blood analysis because we were seeing a lot of the same patterns all the time. We developed, because I work with 200 different liquid herbal tinctures.
Wow.
Standardized certain formulations that we found we were getting the best outcomes with, that had the best research at the best potency at the right ratios to get the formulations correct. And then that's when we started seeing clinical outcomes from our own practice, tested them, and then offered them to practitioners in South Africa and worldwide. Phenomenal. And the results are unbelievable. The proof is in the results and the ability for a patient to see visually what's happening, to understand that this is for this and this is for this and these are the dietary changes, and then to notice the massive shift in their symptomology, and then to see the change in their blood and to see the before and after pictures of the health of the white blood cells, how they become larger, bigger, more active.
Yes.
How the fibrin counts, if there's liver toxicity, how that drops drastically, how oxygenation and antioxidant levels and all of these things improve so beautifully in the blood. And you can see how the plasma cleans up. And if you see any microbes in the back, how they're completely clear. You see fungal inputs, and then also cell wall deficient bacteria. There are signs for that we can see. It gives us a good idea to do additional blood testing to verify, or, urine PCR analysis to see what specific microbes are we working with, so we can get specific treatment on that.
Wow.
If you don't know, they're quite broad spectrum programs that you can work with.
Yes.
So it's an incredible tool. It has its limitations.
You know what I love about it, though, if I interject? It does away with all the medical jargon that separate the patient from the practitioner. And I think that's so empowering.
It's more,
because historically, over the last, say, 100 years, doctor understanding of the Latin-based language is utilized in medical science.
Same with law.
Same with
You
law.
learn a language and then you don't understand the language as the patient because they're speaking Latin.
Which means that you're at the mercy.
Yeah.
Right? Whereas we want to empower people.
Yeah.
I think this is a great way to empower people to not have to be overwhelmed by the nuances of the language, but just get you straight to the point of what's going on.
Yeah. There's your blood. This is why it's sticky. This is the thing.
Yes.
This is why you have these anomalies. Your B12 and this is low, and this is why you have this. So it has incredible value. It also has its limitations, and that's where you need to bring in other arms. You need to bring in a triad of diagnostics. So whether that's sclerology is something that I utilize. So looking at, various patterns and gels and pigments within the whites of the eyes. The first thing I studied was iridology.
Okay.
But I struggled to reconcile what I saw in iridology to what is actually happening right now.
Okay.
And that's when you learn iridology is used to see constitution, kind of like doing a DNA analysis.
Right.
Those are your strengths and weaknesses towards certain things. This particular blue eye or brown eye will have a susceptibility to inflammatory disorders or lymphatic disorders or this. And that's traditionally how homeopaths and the iridology clinics from Russia to Hungary to Europe and Germany, the Falke Institute, how they look at iridology and how you can also see where there's a history of you had this organ removed or you had these traumas. So a lot of iridologists are incredible with their ability to see what has been recorded, over time and where those susceptibilities are, and then advise you on diet and lifestyle and herbals, because most people, diet and lifestyles are going to be hammering their susceptibilities, so they're going to have the symptomology.
Of course.
And then a lot of patients are like, wow, you could see all the stuff in my eye. It's just logic that you're able to...
It's not witchcraft.
No, exactly. They think it's witchcraft. It's definitely not.
Yeah.
And how through the dura mater of the brain and how through the nervous system, your eyes are completely dialed in, and that information can be fed back. Simple sclerology is yellowing in the eye.
Right.
You understand what's happening with your liver, elevated bilirubin. And, other signs, conjunctiva related issues, with viral. And so that they've taken it to many, many steps, and they've taken massive mappings of eyes and pictures and been like, this is a cancer patient. What do we see in those areas? This is the sign of neoplasm. These are signs of various neoplasm. These are pre-development environments because there's a lack of blood supply or lymph supply or a clearance of toxicity from those areas, or there's an accumulation of parasites or bacteria or heavy metals in that particular area. So it's got a long way to go as a science. And I think it's also a useful tool to be used. And then if you can combine that with organic acid or blood testing, all of a sudden you've got amazing information with which to work with.
Lego pieces build up on each other.
And how to treat your patient, yes.
Yeah. You know what I really what I'm getting from what you're saying is that there's synergy in the diagnostic process.
Yes, and I don't think just blood tests and symptomology. You understand?
Absolutely.
You've got 10%, maybe 20%.
Correct. I agree with you.
How are your emotions? What is your lifestyle? Huge questionnaire. What are you eating? Full analysis on the eating.
Correct.
You understand? What is your mineral status? What is your toxicity, heavy metal status? What microbes are we dealing with? What parasites are we dealing with? I mean, in South Africa, we deal with Bilharzia. So many patients. Liver flukes, lamb liver flukes, beef liver flukes. I can't tell you the problems that the farmers, we were developing liposomal antiparasitics, non-toxic, that, you can put on the skin and you can taste it in your mouth. That's how effective the liposomes are. Developing those for the agricultural industry to treat, because if you don't treat your sheep for flukes, they'll kill all of them. The amount of fluke eggs that they produce and the amount of fluke. So that level that they need to treat them at. So, and a lot of people have got liver flukes, but modern medicine says, man, we know.
We don't know what's going on.
No, we don't. We don't look at that. We don't treat it. It's not something that we can test for actively. How do you test for a liver fluke? But in live blood analysis, there are signs and indicators for it. And those are both on fluke worms, but also the more longer term chronic ones like schistosomiasis, the Bilharzia. That's a very, very common one that we see affecting people's kidneys, of people's livers, people's pancreas, and then you do bultricide treatment with herbal treatment and you get massive changes in how people, and then normally they have that with other co-infections. They've been bitten by ticks or horseflies or fleas or any number of things, and then they tend to have a whole host of other co-infections that come with that. So
true, quorum sensing is a real thing.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely, it is. And I mean, working with certain herbs that will disrupt that quorum sensing, is curcumin is one of them, and there's so many others, but that's an important one. And those microbes in the gut, they organize and they communicate with each other, and they build biofilms and they protect each other. So you want to disrupt that, and you want to disrupt their biofilms, and you want to get into that, and you want to clear it.
So just to clarify to people, and I really want this to hit home, live blood and dark field live blood analysis. I know so many patients that have gone through different IgG analysis, PCR analysis, and the plethora of tests to figure out what the antibody response is to a particular suspected infection. Let's say Lyme's disease, Borrelia. But the mechanisms, the intelligence, should we say, that these particular pathogens have to cloak themselves, to distort how our immune systems are able to create the right antibody response, dwindles over time.
Yeah.
So often when I actually see a positive IgG response or IgM response occurring from Borrelia, I'm like, okay, that's actually a good sign. And the reason why I say it's a good sign, because the immune system's actually able...
It's starting to deal with it.
Yeah. When there's no positive, and you have to do a little bit of a deeper dive, and often more than not, working online, I don't have the access to that, and I have to refer out. But often more than not, people have to go and do a dark field live blood analysis. And that's where you're able to detect these pathogens. They're able to cloak themselves like a Houdini pathogen, should we call it that?
Absolutely.
And I think, for one, this is invaluable. I mean, what other forms of pathogens that are quite common, that people aren't in the realization as to how common they are, that are wreaking havoc in people's health, creating seemingly common pathologies, but the root cause is not being properly identified? Could you list some other pathogens that you have had an experience in your practice that create that cloaking mechanism of which you were able to distinguish through a live blood analysis, but other doctors or practitioners weren't able to do through conventional medical testing?
So with really, really, really good dark field analysis, I have often seen spirochetes. So that is in syphilis patients and in Lyme's patients. Okay, specifically we talk about Borrelia in Lyme's patients. So there are signs of that and indicators for it.
What is just for viewers out there that don't have a historic understanding of the implications? What does the spirochete formations do? What impact does it have on the body?
It's a type of bacteria that exists in a spiral format, and one of the most common ones that we all know is syphilis.
Yes.
Syphilis is one of those. And then Lyme's, which is Lyme, otherwise known as Borrelia, is a tick-borne pathogen. You get bitten by a tick. You could get bitten by fleas. Even mosquitoes have also been considered as carriers of it.
Wow.
Spider bites, couple of other, any kind of weird and wonderful bites. You're not sure what you would get. You could get one species. You could get multiple species. So Lyme's is one of them that we see. Another one, over time, if you can leave the sample for a period of time, because it exists specifically in the red blood cells, is Bartonella, which is a protozoa. You get Rickettsia, which is also a tick-borne. You get Ehrlichia,
from cat's claws.
Cat's claws, Ehrlichia. You get Babesia, Babesia is also, so you get these other co-infections that exist that come with it, and it's normally always, it's not just Lyme's.
Absolutely.
There's normally all the other co-infections or a combination of them that are causing more problems, and then that makes your symptoms more pronounced. And then that also comes with, because your system has been trying to deal with this over a period of time, your immunity and your vitality has dropped so drastically that you then become a host, or not necessarily a host, but your viral infections become more active. So
more frequent flus, more frequent
flus, chronic viral infections like Epstein-Barr virus,
CMV,
herpes virus, cytomegalovirus. Those ones really start to wreak havoc in the system. and then your recovery from other kinds of infections like COVID, or your ability to maintain or keep long COVID then becomes also, why do some patients have long COVID and some don't? Yeah. What is the other interplay of these co-infections that play part of that? Yeah. So that these are the analysis that we look at, and there are specific signs in dark field analysis that we can see, and there's specific markers for it that we know we're dealing with cell wall deficient bacteria. We're dealing with CWD bacteria, cell wall deficient, that your body...
What's an example of cell wall?
Cell wall deficient would be your rickettsia-based stuff. You know, those. It's a bacteria that your body struggles to identify.
Right.
And, you know,
so some of them got the mitogen complex.
Yes, some of them will exist, you know, in the intracellular matrix. Some will exist in the extracellular matrix. How does your body now deal with this? And through that process is causing issues with how the cell gets nutrients, how it detoxifies. So how do you treat it? So now you start treating it, and all of a sudden you push it out the cell. Extreme, you know, hexamer or antibody response or reaction to it, you know, or, you know, you start treating it and then it will start to retreat into a biofilm or something along those lines. So that's why it's very important to identify, number one, what you have, number two, what your environment is, and then number three, do a comprehensive protocol to address it from multiple angles. Yes. So those are some of the most common ones that we see. And then often what will happen is there'll be some additional mold toxicity, and then like 95% of people with some kind of fungal candida overgrowth in the gut in conjunction with that. So
mold toxicity.
Yes.
It's growing. Everybody's becoming more and more aware of it. If you look on social media, it's almost on every influencer's post this week. Yes. Particularly this week, you know, there's a trend to things. Mold toxicity, mold's been around for millennia. Why is it that people are developing more of a toxic issue through the exposure of mold? What is your opinion as to why this is happening?
I think my opinion on it is, I wouldn't say that they're developing it as much. I think our ability to test and identify it is becoming easier.
Okay.
And I think a lot of people weren't aware that the house that they were living in, the mold growing over there or in your taps or in here has been contributing to your health issues, has now established itself inside your system, in your nasal passages, in your lungs, in your gut, and it's producing this toxicity which is causing all of these major health issues. True. And mold is one of the more serious ones, you know, that can kill you quick, you know, and, you know, whereas the other things like Borrelia and Rickettsia, chronic, you use this chronic, and use a chronic pain and inflammation, and then your body's ability to deal with mold. And I think people's microbiomes have been so assaulted, and I think the ability to deal with mold and maintain the oxygenation, the antioxidant status, as well as the ability to clear toxicity in the system has become heavily compromised. That's through new infections, mass vaccinations, massive Wi-Fi and 5G, a massive increase in global toxicity and burden on top of that.
Totally.
And so your susceptibility to molds becomes that much more pronounced. That's my theory.
You know what I find fascinating, just to add into your theory, you mentioned a few sentences, should we say paragraphs ago now, about electromagnetism.
Yes.
You know, the discovery of electromagnetism from Faraday back in the 1800s, he discovered it by utilizing magnets in close proximity with electric current.
Yes.
And this is how he was able to ascertain his theory, or not ascertain, to develop his theory behind electromagnetism. Now, in our understanding from that, we were able to create turbine engines and a whole work of different technological advancements that have come from that. And yet, in the modern day paradigm, where we have non-native electromagnetic frequencies impacting our environment, the unseen aspects of our environment, we're still, or at least some of us, are still in doubt as to the severity of impact that those electromagnetic frequencies that are well outside of the Schumann frequency are creating to the mutation or the mutative effect to these pathogens itself. Because just like us, when we go through moments of hormesis, what happens? We go through an opportunity of homeoadaptive change.
Yes.
So too, the microorganisms go through their process of hormesis.
Absolutely.
And on a cellular level, electromagnetism has a far wider reaching effect to that of a macro level.
So it's an interesting theory that each time there's an increased electrification of the grid, there's a pandemic.
Yeah.
So if you look at the history of all pandemics, there was radar in World War I, and then there was electrical grids, and there's all of that kind of stuff. So that increased electrical approach is either electrification is increasing toxicity in the system, but also challenging microbes to adapt.
Absolutely.
And, they've spent millions of years evolving, and they will change they will morph and change their biological structure dependent on the level of food, the level of toxicity, the level of oxygenation, the pH, a whole number of factors. And I think there's been a very interesting shift in what's happened in the world and in our food supply and in toxicity levels that is causing the change in the biological terrain. Because you have a soil, you have a water system that exists within your body. You are a fish tank.
Yeah.
Instead of having the water on the outside of you, you're a fish on the inside.
Correct.
Same seawater, same concept. So at the same time that Pasteur discovered or sort of launched his germ theory, there was Louis Béchamp who came out with terrain theory.
Yeah.
And on Pasteur's deathbed, apparently, he said, Béchamp, you were right. I stole it. Created, penicillin and all these other factors, and pasteurization and all those factors associated with it. Whereas, why will you have in certain creches? Some kids have got strep throat. 30% of them. The rest are carrying but are asymptomatic.
Yep.
Why? What is those factors? So that's the theory that blood analysis works on, is that this internal fish tank water, if you're not filtering that water properly, if you're putting all the wrong stuff into it,
correct,
if you don't get the pH and the oxygenation levels correct in it, what starts growing in the fish tank?
Overgrowth.
Overgrowth.
Fungus.
You start having fungus and molds and algae and all these weird and wonderful things. The water gets sick, the fish gets sick, the fish dies.
Yeah.
So people don't clean their water. This is why cleansers are theoretically so effective. Doing colonics, clearing all of that built up toxicity, and then doing things like EBO, where you're filtering out all of that toxicity and all of those immune complexes, and you're hyper-oxygenating the environment, and you're remineralizing, and it can be the massive shift, especially in autoimmune disorders or in microbes and things like that.
Very much so.
Yeah. So
I think if I can add something to that, I think before anybody makes an investment on the complexities of drugs, naturopathic remedies, or hormones, or whatever it might, and I'm saying these things do have their place, for absolutely. But before anybody makes a huge investment into that, invest in the practice, the habitual aspect of detoxification. A simple, basic Epsom salts bath, taking some binders before having an Epsom salts bath and minerals right after.
Yes.
I've seen miracles happen.
Yes.
When people doing that. People had chronic Crohn's, like severe Crohn's. Chronic Crohn's is a bit of a... but severe Crohn's or IBD or what have you, literally by just incorporating the Epsom salts bath with binders and minerals, their symptoms drastically reduced.
And it shows you, they say that there's no science that your skin absorbs magnesium. But that's been an age-old thing where people go sit in the springs. And that spring is high in lithium and it cures all of this. And this one's high in bicarb.
What about the copper baths that they used to have in ancient Rome?
Copper baths was one of them. what else? What are some of the other, and then Epsom salt, sulfur based.
Yes, sulfur.
Magnesium and sulfur. So you're addressing the sulfur pathways and detoxification, and then you're addressing remineralization with magnesium, or, the Great Salt Lake, in America, or, the salt lakes in Turkey and those areas where you get that the Dead Sea and that increased mineralization. So I mean, I've noticed myself, magnesium bath, there's nothing that makes you feel better or sleep better or improve aching, not just compared to a normal warm water bath.
Absolutely.
Those pores open, that body takes up those minerals and stimulates that detoxification. So
I'll even say it goes far. I've seen people go through Herx responses.
Yes.
And this is what anybody watching this, error caution. Something seemingly as innocent as an Epsom salts bath can induce a Herx response, making you feel ill for a few days.
Absolutely.
And you got options to either back off and try to get the system more prepared for it, or to venture through it bravely with managing as to the severity of the Herx, obviously.
And simple things like every Sunday, mom would give you a tablespoon of castor oil.
Right.
Just once a week cleanse, and or on a Sunday, wouldn't eat meat.
Yes.
It would be a fasting day or a fruit day. These are all like simple things that I think a lot of people have forgotten. They think, just doing a juice fast or a juice cleanse can make the world of difference. And then if you incorporate, spirulina and dulse and cilantro and a couple other things that as you're purifying, there's a lot of this toxicity that's coming out of your system.
Yeah.
And I mean, the amount of new chemicals that have been added into the system that we can't see, that, the amount of chemicals that women are putting on their skin with makeup,
phthalates,
bisphenol A, whole range of hormonal disruptors in there. Your skin absorbs 60% of what you put on it.
Yeah.
Now you're putting on all these creams and all this makeup, and then you wonder why you've had this level of toxicity. Then you get put in amalgams in your teeth, and porcelain is, and there's still dentists these days which will still put mercury.
Oh yes, I know this firsthand. I remember 4 years ago, I went to go have a checkup done, unbeknownst to me, it was a recommendation from a person I had been seeing at the time, and it was her family dentist. I got there, and this guy's trying to convince me to put amalgam fillings, and I'm like, so what about the mercury toxicity? I don't know, it's no more exposure than that if you were eating tuna every day.
Oh, but I wouldn't eat tuna every day.
Tuna every day because of that exact reason.
Yeah, the accumulation and the toxicity is too high, and the amount and the level of pesticides, heavy metals, other forms of industrial toxins, even historical toxins, things like DDT, are still, you can still pick it up.
MTBE in the soil.
Absolutely. Yeah. This accumulative toxicity is the massive problem. So you need to take things that support that detoxification, humic and fulvic acids, zeolites, activated charcoals, other forms of binders to clear it, curcumin, cilantro, which is coriander, otherwise known as dhania. These things have all been chlorella, spirulina, phycocyanins. You need to be integrating these as part of your diet. Seaweeds are incredible with that. So
I couldn't agree more.
Dulse and nori, and, taking in things and doing periodic cleanses.
Yes.
With maybe doing, juicing with doing the colonics and taking the bentonite and the zeolite with psyllium and cleaning and clearing all of that while you stimulate your filtration organs like your kidneys and your liver to release that toxicity, because that it's accumulative in your tissues and the extracellular matrix. It can't clear. When you give it that space all of a sudden, and all those plastics, microplastics, nanoplastics, they just did research now that your plastic bottle has got nanoplastic in it.
Oh, wonderful.
Like something like 10 times the amount that they thought was in it.
Oh,
so, and then you look at the state of if you haven't got a filtration system in your water on, or you're doing reverse osmosis and adding some minerals, you're getting a whole cocktail of estrogen and industrial toxins and heavy metals, and you must just see what your filter looks like after you filtered it for a period of time.
No, it's disgusting, to say the least.
Yes. So improving filtration and detoxification of this is the foundational point people need to do regularly. And science will say, oh, there's no research behind that. Oh, where's the studies? The proof is in the results, the improvement in clarity and how much better you feel, how often you get sick, improvements in blood parameters, cleansing, fasting, where people do these retreats over a period of time have been done since time immemorial.
Absolutely.
With the most incredible results.
And I find it so funny when people talk about studies, because like you mentioned before, if you actually are able to understand what a study is representing, there is conclusive evidence. Observational studies that are not, regardless, look at, yes, random control trials, but random control trials are deemed to be applied for a specific period of time.
Yes.
It's not going to give you a long enough period of time unless you have an extreme amount of a budget to be able to conduct the study. Generally, how we're going to see the effect of lifestyle factors like detoxes through an observational analysis.
Yes.
And there's been an insurmountable amount of observational analysis done, where a clear indication of, let's say, exercise. Exercise is a form of detoxification, right? You instigate heat shock protein activity, which is one of the most direct mechanisms to detoxify. Also, one of the mechanisms you get hijacked in the formation of biofilm. Topic for another conversation. But that alone, when they were able to, when they were assessing the impact of depression and schizophrenia amongst women, it was the Iowa Women's Study. And they took out the covariant of exercise. It was shown that fiber, in this particular study, had the effect to reduce the likelihood of depression. Okay. As to what percentile, I can't recall, but nonetheless, it had a very tangible p-value. It was under 0.001 for statistical relevance, right? Okay. And that was after a post-hoc analysis as well. When they put in the covariant of exercise, fiber no longer showed the efficacy when exercise wasn't present in those particular segments of the population.
Interesting.
So this synergy here, this is what I'm trying to get at. Regardless if we take chlorella or we take seaweed, we take nori, we have a juice fast, we exercise, we have an Epsom salt bath, all of it is vitally important to take into consideration as a dynamic of covariant consideration to the projection of health. Right?
Absolutely. And I think most people don't realize what it takes to get to optimal or how far gone they are in terms of their health and what needs to be done to get there.
Yeah.
They just go to the doctor, do blood tests, give me some medicine.
Instant gratification society.
Treat my diabetes. Not going to tell you, listen, you need to stop eating seed oils, and you need to stop eating the amount of saturated fat and the amount of calories that's contributing, the amount of refined carbohydrates that are contributing to your insulin resistance. No, because most people won't change that. But those people that get deathly sick and that really want to make the change will. But a lot of people don't. So,
what I also found interesting, Rory, if I can just venture into what you're saying, what I found is that I've helped a lot of people with different forms of addiction, right? From cigarettes to drugs to alcohol, name the like. And all these are toxins, right? And what I found very interesting is when you start to support the body in ridding the source that fortifies microbes or pathogens' resilience, i.e. addressing the biofilm, which is what I've done, the lower the toxic load, the less of the inclination towards the addiction.
Absolutely.
All right.
So yes, the addictions for the particular things, whether it's food or alcohol, feeds the particular microbe.
How crazy would it be that these microbes have a consciousness that we haven't perceived that they possibly could have, directly influencing our thought process or what we desire?
So it's not far out and it's not crazy. It has been proven that your microbiome is directly linked via the vagus nerve to your brain and contribute to neuroplasticity, and how particular microbes produce GABA and various neurotransmitters and dopamine, all produced in the gut lining.
Yeah.
So those are your positive microbes that influence BDNF production, dopamine production, serotonin, 5-HTP, all of those factors.
All the peptides and neurotransmitters.
All the peptides and that stimulation of it. But then how do we document and see what is what are the byproducts that candida produces?
Correct.
That influences you to eat that cheese or eat this, and it's producing alcohols, it's producing vinegars, it's producing other forms of neurotoxins, which are causing brain fog and fogginess.
Quinolinic
acid causing, and then you stiff and sore. Why are you sore all the time? How is that interfering with what's happening in your muscular function? And then you start to address the pathogens and start to clear that, and then people's cravings go away.
Yeah.
Things that they used to want to eat. I don't feel like sugar anymore. I actually don't feel like drinking. I don't want to anymore. Yeah. So which microbes play that factor in that, or your susceptibility to being more addictive? And then taking stimulant-based things like nicotine or various other things, of what that does to the physiology, how it changes the pH and how it increases your cortisol, and how that changes the pH. It creates more of an environment for that particular microbe. Yeah. So we are driven by
anaerobic microbes, particularly with nicotine.
Absolutely. So we're driven by that. You think you don't have the willpower. Yeah. They're very, very powerful byproducts produced by these microbes that are driving you to that. Yeah. So the cleaner the cleaner you become, the less the toxicity and the lower that microbe load across multiple families, the so much better you feel and the less you crave all of these kinds of.
The reduction of density is vital here.
Yes.
To connection to yourself, true self.
Yeah, because the cleaner and clearer you feel so good, and you're like, it's not something that I need to do. And I think people are looking for that outlet, and they're looking for, when you take that nicotine, it gives you that stimulation. Yeah. They don't know that they can have it naturally.
Of course.
They're using magic mushrooms, or they're using ayahuasca to get that extreme feeling of connection. Yeah. When you can just do it through exercising and cleansing and supplementing and all of that kind of stuff.
I love that you're bringing this up, because I'm a big advocate for the appropriate use of psychedelic medicine.
Absolutely.
The appropriate use.
Yes.
But again, I had a conversation with a patient of mine 3 days ago, actually, for that fact, and a wonderful patient based out in New York, and he's going through the die-off symptomatic process right now, which means he's going through expressions of depression, doubt, ruminative thoughts are coming up. Now, what do we do? Do we back off? No, because all his physiological markers are showing that he can go through it. Mm-hmm. So what do we do? We support his psychology. Right? We give him neurological feedback mechanisms to help him understand that those thoughts aren't his own, but they're actually the resistance of whatever the entity, and I love to call them entities, right? Because we always separate things, like spiritual organizations or religious organizations have always had this essence or sense of demonic forces or entities. Well, I don't think there's anything more demonic or anything that's more invasive than a
parasite,
right? That can directly, yet subtly, influence your perception of self and how it is that you conduct yourself in your lifetime. And the reason why I was smiling when you were talking about, how they alter the state, and because I was thinking about what you mentioned before about the detox process of fasting. And I'm recalling back in the days when exorcisms were performed. I know they're still being performed, but they performed the masses. Obviously, during the time period where they were tied to their beds, they weren't being given any food, I would assume. So maybe the exorcism of these particular demonic forces actually came about from getting rid of the parasitic influence that created the bad character. That's fantastic. I'm going to the extremes here, but it brings to a certain point.
I think there were a lot of parasites and microbes and stuff like that would create that level of delirium, that level of fever, that level of contrition in the body.
Yes.
That if you didn't understand science, this would be demonic forces, which theoretically it is, because it's parasitic.
Absolutely.
Something has come into the system. I mean, Chinese medicine calls it, they call it penetration of evil forces into the system, which is just bacteria, whether it caused gastro or whether it caused, lung infections or things like that. So in the rudimentary way that they could explain it, that's what they would do.
And I think it's unfortunate with the human superiority complex in understanding of higher intellect that we discredit that these particular microorganisms have a very strong consciousness of their own. And that's to our own
absolutely
disadvantage.
And I think it's also a symptom of humanity's sickness, and how things like Lyme's, it's probably the most virulent disease actually in the North America. It's the most diagnosed pathological pathogen is Lyme's.
Correct.
And I think a lot of people think, well, I've never been bitten by a tick. You can have sexual intercourse with someone that gets transferred.
Absolutely.
You understand? So you don't just get syphilis or gonorrhea or other weird, wonderful, like sort of extreme things. You get a whole ecology that comes with them. You also get their hohos. You also get their microbes. Correct. And that's how it can be through saliva, blood transfusions, number of other factors. So I think it's like Lyme's is the AIDS of our new generation.
Yep.
Or these other cell wall deficient bacterias, the Bartonellas, the Babesias, the Rickettsias, and the chronic inflammatory effect that it has in the system on the nervous system, and the effect that it has in autoimmune disorders. Your body just doesn't up and attack itself.
Right.
It doesn't just jump up and bite you. Well, maybe you do get bitten by a tick and you've got it. But it's a chronic inflammatory response that your organs are, why is your immune system so in the myelin of your nervous system? Why is it so reactive in that? Why is it that inflammatory response and causing that scar tissue?
MS.
In multiple sclerosis, ALS, neurodegenerative issues like Alzheimer's and dementias and stuff like that. They're implicating Lyme's.
Yeah.
They're implicating Lyme's in this. Yeah. And, I think so many people will have it low grade and will just kind of function, but they don't know the havoc that it's wreaking in their system. Correct. And testing is another problem. A lot of modern
false
negatives, Western blot test only when treatment is working.
Actually come up with the antibody response.
Will you actually pick it up? So we need to use multiple forms, PCR, urine challenge test seems to be.
Dark field live blood analysis.
Dark field, very, very useful, very, very powerful. Yeah. And at the same time as that, the microbe is not necessarily the problem.
Yes.
The terrain and the environment and the toxicity and the
perfect storm
and the human, like you mentioned on emotional related stuff. A lot of people have got stuff sitting in their emotional body, in their etheric body that they need to shed. And we see that in sclerology. Yeah. There's a particular membrane that sits on top of the conjunctiva that you can see massive emotional related stuff. Yeah. And as you start to do cleansing, it starts to clear. Yeah. People start to feel emotionally light. They start to feel lighter. Because you're processing that it has a vibrational energy. It sits in your electromagnetic system, in your aura. So while you're dealing with that, treating that infection, you also have to process energetically the emotions. Yeah. That's why something from 20 years ago starts to come up and you start, I hate them. And because you've only now given the space or the energy for your body to actually start to deal and process these emotions. Mm-hmm. So yes, they need kinesiology, or they need people to talk them through the stuff to be like, these are things that you need to process, because your physiological issues that you're dealing with physically is bringing up all the emotional stuff that needs to be processed. It's stored in cells.
Energy in motion gets stuck.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Emotion gets stuck. Energy in motion. I think most people don't realize what that word really means. Emotion. Energy in motion.
Energy in motion,
right? And if it gets stuck and all of a sudden you liberate it, it's going to come through to your conscious seat.
Your cells have cellular memory. Your DNA has memory. You have it on multiple levels. Yeah. That's why you've got to address your health issues on multiple levels. And that's
completely agreed.
Kinesiology and
hypnosis, feedback. Yeah.
Body talk hypnosis,
tapping, which is the body talk you mentioned.
Tapping, EFT, emotional freedom technique, neurobalance, where they map out your neurology and they get your sort of your brain mapping to that level. These are incredible things that are used not in individuality, but as part of the process.
Correct.
And the shifts are unbelievable. I cannot tell you, my patients that have followed the protocols, that come back to me insulin levels are, through the roof, treat for that month, insulin all the way down. The specialist is like, what are you doing? Like, how does this work? Estrogen levels through the roof, do an estrogen clearance protocol, estrogen way down, symptomology, increase boron all of a sudden, she's feeling much better, but and then start looking at very, very specific things, and then treating on such an advanced level, and then doing the neurobalance and doing kinesiology, where these people completely shift and change their lives. They get divorced, they move country, these huge shifts that start to happen as a result of that, like most unbelievable outcomes. That's why I've seen what integrative medicine has done for my health and what it's done for me, and no one can tell me anything. I see the results on a daily basis. Where they've been to pillar to post with every physician. Come to me, we treat them. And these are the true healers of the world. Do you understand? And I think modern medicine strips you of that. They strip you of that practitioner inspiration. And,
I think it's pharmaceutical agenda that's created segregation amongst practitioners. That's what it comes down to. It's the age-old tradition of war, right? Divide and conquer.
Absolutely.
And unfortunately, they've done it at the heart of where healing is meant to come from.
Absolutely.
Rory, with that being said, I have one more question, and then we'll have to wrap it up for today, because we've definitely delved into our passion. 100%. And I really appreciate you for sharing your heart and your mind and part of your soul.
It's a pleasure.
And everything's been shared. My question to you is, how does integrative medicine, if you can sum it up into one paragraph, how does integrative medicine bridge the gap in health transformation?
So if we're talking specifically on the topic of microbes and toxicity and how these microbes work in the system, you'll often find that just treating with herbal or integrative medicine doesn't yield the results that you're looking for. Antibiotics, in, let's say, for example, treating Lyme's disease, or a combination of antibiotics, will do a 90% clearance. But if you but then it's going to retreat in and protect itself in a biofilm and cyst itself, and a year later you're going to have a relapse.
Exactly.
But modern medicine doesn't know how to treat biofilms.
No.
This is why we're getting antibiotic resistance. That's why people are having biofilms in the nose, in the urinary tract, in the ears, in the gut, in the lungs, and fungal biofilms, bacterial biofilms, antibiotic resistant bacterias, things like that. So adding in integrative herbal medicine or functional nutritional medicine, orthomolecular medicine, in breaking down biofilms in conjunction with specific herbals.
Yes.
Like if we're treating Lyme's, we would work with things like sarsaparilla, cryptolepsis, resveratrol, cat's claw.
Japanese not where resveratrol, right?
Polygonum multiflorum, things like cat's claw, andrographis, astragalus, black walnut, artemisia annua, cistus.
Yeah.
Cistus is one of the best for breaking down biofilms.
Yeah.
Cistus
tastes good.
Kind of tastes great.
Yeah, it's great tea.
It's
like the Batula you and I were just drinking, right?
In Turkey, I was just there in Turkey. They were selling it. You can buy throat lozenges with cistus in it, which is great.
Amazing.
So you treating someone with chronic Lyme's with antibiotics, they're constantly relapsing. There's within 6 years, there's a massive relapse. You need to address biofilms. There's nothing medically that works with that.
Yeah.
So we work with enzyme complexes, serrapeptase, nattokinase, lumbrokinase, to break down the biofilms, terminella, churchobula, thymol, cavricol from oregano, clove oil, cinnamon oil, ozonoids, which are ozonated essential oils like black cumin oil and all of these. And, these things like also caprylic acid and lauric acid, these all dissolve.
Strong antivirals.
Yeah, and then other enzymes that break down that extracellular carbohydrate matrix. Then you start breaking down the biofilm. You get antibiotics do their job, but you also need to address the parasites from multiple different angles with a complex herbal. And then one complex herbal the 1 week, one complex herbal the next week. The clinical outcomes is 100 times far superior.
Yeah.
1,000 times more superior if you can penetrate the biofilm.
Yeah.
So how do you now, and this is where the integration comes in.
Yes.
And this is the power of integrative medicine. The two should be used in tandem. And the doctors that are doing that are getting the most incredible results.
Absolutely. And I love the fact that you made an emphasis they should be used in tandem, because I'm not one to promote the use of antibiotics as an example, but they have their essential use in a particular scenario, especially once we have broken through biofilm and we want to prevent the likelihood of a pathogen having the opportunity to create biofilm in the first place.
Create biofilm or also adapt to the antibiotics.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Rory, thank you so much.
It's been great.
Your absolute wealth of knowledge, and you're a practitioner that really cares. You know, it's a rarity in the world. I think we are so hell-bent on performance that we all live past one another. And it's a breath of fresh air to meet somebody that's actually is able to breathe themselves and to be present in conversation. So thank you very much for your contribution. And everybody out there, thank you for tuning in and listening to what we have to share. And hopefully this will help and enrich your process towards optimizing your health, or those of you that have family members or friends going through a bit of a rough time. If you have any questions or any concerns or would like some more guidance to your particular situation, reach out to us. We're always happy to help. Until we meet again next time, Rory, thank you very much for your time.
It's been great. It's a pleasure. It's been great.
For me, Justin McGuire, remember, stay optimized.